This is StoryRobot. Welcome to r/prorevenge. Our first story of today is, mess with my kids. That's going to cost you a pretty penny, and get you in trouble with the law. So, I've got an acquaintance, Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago, so he's not a dummy. The problem is that he thinks that because he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just an example, my kids are in Montessori schools. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When he heard, he went on a 30-minute lecture about how we're throwing our money away and Montessori is nonsense. When I told him that I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite, and gave him some real-world examples, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, etc., he still would not admit he might not be 100% correct. Not the subject of this revenge, but so you understand the person we're dealing with. Another thing that's important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time, and he's been tested from here until next week. He's just a really smart, socially oblivious, pain in the beep. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him, but unfortunately, that isn't always possible, and last week we were both at the same group braai for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back home from overseas. I've known Jack since grade school, so we brought our families and made it more than just a long time, no-see type of thing. At some point later on in the afternoon my eldest, Awesome, 10 years old, came to me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they're unhealthy, and he explained what went into hot dogs and what they're made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit, I calmed her down and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was thankfully easily distracted by something else and moved on. I didn't want to make a fuss with Jack or with Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. About 30 minutes later I heard Awesome scream and begin crying. I ran over to her. Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control, and I took Richard aside and told him that, A. You don't ever talk to a men's kids without permission, B. You don't ever teach a men's kids without permission, and C. You sure as beep don't ever touch a men's kids without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be a mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was the hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay the beep away from my family. For the rest of the evening, I kept my eye on him, and he didn't come near them. Jack enjoyed, we all ate some good meat, end of the story as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be a mistake. A few days later we received a visit from a child protection officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, what house with kids is spotless, everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions, said everything was fine, and left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer, just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we were in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard, and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure, though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house. He doubled down yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called protective services on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. This turned out to be a mistake. I'm not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the son of a beep in half. I told him that if he came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put out on him, and I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll get the ball rolling with some friends of his with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble, using his admission. Still waiting on that, the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then, I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about the new flat he'd be moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting in lots of new and expensive features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same on his new flat. He did most of the electrical work himself, which is a big no-no unless you're licensed. I called in an inspector on both of his flats, who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if, Richard being Richard, he began arguing with the inspector that his work was good enough and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring in a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats. This meant dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court. Because his sale fell through, he's now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there was a fine levied against him, but I sure as hell hope so. Lesson of the story: you don't ever beep with a man his kids. The last story of today is, giving away a Master Sergeant's golf clubs. So many years ago I was a logistician in the United States Marine Corps. My unit was headed overseas on a little mini deployment to Morocco. I was in charge of the logistics in my unit even though I was only a corporal. This was because first we didn't have a staff sergeant to run the shop and the sergeants we had were garbage at logistics and got put to work for me. So anyways, we're gearing up to go on this little mini deployment and the master sergeant who was going to be the highest ranking enlisted comes over to my office to chat. He starts off being real cool and then eventually asks if he can bring his golf clubs within one of our containers. I thought to myself that it would be wise to be on his good side since I was only a corporal and going on a deployment with his company. So I agreed, even though it was against the rules and regulations, however everyone does it all the time. So anyways we go to Morocco and he has his clubs. No course in sight but he was happy hitting balls so I didn't care. However, then everything changed. His Marines didn't request to bring enough materials to build what we were there for. They start saying I'm missing a 20-foot container, which doesn't happen to me. So I finally solved the mystery. It turns out they didn't request to bring enough and left the materials behind their office. So here we are in Africa to do a job but we don't have enough materials. So he tries to use me as a scapegoat. Even a gunnery sergeant and a staff sergeant of his get in on this and just treat me like beep because I refused to take the fall for their shops beep up. This goes on for the entire 2 months we are there, and we are in the middle of nowhere so nothing for me to do but deal. Anyways, we start heading home and we head back to civilization to a port and we had to clean our gear to go back to the US as per customs and biosecurity. So we are cleaning everything, even tank had to take tanks off their tracks and clean the tracks. It was a pain in the beep, but still a cool experience. The problem however was that the master sergeant kept needing to reopen containers that had been finished. Now the problem with this was that we had to have actual US customs agents on site and use their banding seals to seal the containers, which then had to be documented with the unique serial number. Every time we had to open one I had to beg the customs agents to open them and let us get whatever the master sergeant needed, and them close it up without having to redo the cleaning. Normally it is a solid no, but the agents were cool, and we worked it out. Plus every night I usually ran into them at the bars and I would buy them beer. It got to the point where the agents didn't even have any of their own seals left because of how many times we did it. They ended up using mine to reseal. It really made things difficult and it was often for dumb beep. So finally I had it. It was literally the last day we had for cleaning and of course the master sergeant wanted something else. So I asked the agents. They were really fed up of it. However, I then asked, do either of you guys golf? One of them said yes. I said then we need 2 containers open. So we got the dumb beep for the master sergeant, then we went to the other container where I knew the master sergeant golf clubs were hiding. I opened the container, pulled out the clubs and gave them to the agent. He looked at me and I just said, I don't want to hear beep about opening any more containers. He was cool with it and got it in his car. No issues from there on. Anyways, we get back to the States and the ship pulls in with the gear and we got it home no problem. A week later the master sergeant comes in my office. He's all buddy again. He then asks where his golf clubs were. I said, my guess is your garage or your closet. He forces a chuckle and goes, haha, okay come on dog, where's my clubs? I then said, I don't know what you're talking about Master Sergeant. He then said, my club's in the container. I then explained to him that per the Department of Transportation Regulation Chapter 3, I even had it down to the sub-chapter and paragraph letter that no personal gear can be shipped inside of military cargo containers. He then starts getting mad and I keep repeating the paragraph. He loses it. Grabs me, but my shop's gunnery sergeant got to him quick and pulled him off before he swung on me. He never did find out what I did to his clubs, and I left the unit about 6 months later to go to my next command. Thank you for watch. Error. Problem detected. Not enough subscribers. Please subscribe, like and comment.